Welcome back. I'm talking with Representative Cliff Baer and Representative Phil Hart, and we've been talking about a lot of different things, but prior to the break we were talking about charter schools. Tell us a bit about what a charter school really is and how they got started.
Well, charter schools are another form of public schools in Idaho. The big difference is that as far as funding is concerned, is they don't have local property tax authority or funding. You don't have any levies. It's all through the state. So as far as the state is concerned, there's a funding formula that we go through, and there are economies of scale as to how much money per student depending on classroom unit sizes and whether they're urban or rural, and there's kind of an equity factor built into that. But there's an uphill battle with charter schools because they don't have that local property tax, and because of that, when you put everything in the hopper and it comes out at the other end, they actually end up being around 25% less per student considering all funds. Charter schools are about diversity and parent choice. One size does not fit all regarding education. You need to be able to meet the needs of kids and go into specialty fields, have different forms of education and diversity and different tools in the classroom, different teaching techniques, different tools regarding technology and things like that. The misnomer is, well, you guys, some of you are always saying you need to consolidate schools. Mm-hmm. That is true in regards to the efficiencies that we can find in administration. In less than half of our personnel in K through 12 are actually instructional. Mm-hmm. In regards to efficiencies in pupil transportation, economies of scale in purchasing technology and classroom materials, yes, those things we should do the most that we can with tax dollars.
We shouldn't have buses passing each other to pick up.
Exactly. But when it comes to the classroom, one size doesn't fit all. We need to have diversity for parents and for their kids and different opportunities. And so charters are meant to be complementary. They're not competitive. They're complementary to choice for parents and for their kids in the Idaho school system. So the cap is really an artificial factor because we still have to have authorization. And again, it's a lot of work to start a charter. Mm-hmm. You have to have authorization from your school board and to our process through the Charter Commission or the State Board of Education. And you get that all in place, and then you break ground, and all that's done with private money. And what the cap was doing, it was viewed as unfriendly, and over a dozen states in the last few years have dropped their caps. And there are all these entrepreneurial efforts and philanthropy and foundations that donate towards education. And a lot of those go towards charters since, again, they don't have property tax mm-hmm. support. And with this cap removed, Idaho will have a more friendly charter policy and attract some of those monies a lot from the private sector. And that's fantastic for education opportunities.
Well, for people who are supportive of education, I don't know anybody, liberal, conservative, or otherwise, that doesn't support education. What I like about it, and I really got involved when our old friend Ralph Smead, who passed away a couple years ago, donated some ground to start the Thomas Jefferson School over in Canyon County. And I became a bit curious about it. And I think the thing that struck me is that every legislator takes an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. Our Constitution says we will have a system of free public education. Well, some of us were somewhat critical over the fact that, you know, as you said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And just because you put 25 kids in a room for so many days out of the year doesn't mean they're all going to come out on the other side learning what they need to learn. What I liked about the charter school is the parental involvement in it. And if they felt that they wanted a strong hard sciences, you know, strong in the hard sciences or strong otherwise, they had some kind of say in it. So for those who believe in choice in education, it seems like the charter school has something to offer.
It does have this. It has a lot to offer, and there are 7,000 or 8,000 kids currently practically on waiting lists, looking for that opportunity. And what you mentioned is the key to all of this, and that is the parental involvement and parental responsibility, because you will find the diversity in charter schools that you find in your traditional public schools. The big difference is the engaging aspect of the parents and how they get involved in their kids' education. So there are special needs charter schools. There are
special
absolutely
needs as well.
there are technical charter schools and preparation for fields in medical health care. It's a lot of diversity, but the key is how the parents engage.
Wonderful. Okay, let's talk a little bit about tax relief. Who wants to tackle that?
Well, we did have a bill this year that got out of the House that lowered both the personal and corporate income tax rate by 0.4%. So now we are not the highest in the region. We are just equal with a couple of other states. So that's going in the right direction.
We're less bad than
right.
Okay, all right. Well, it's going in the right direction anyway, right? It's really tough when you're. How many states do we have that we border that have no corporate tax? Is it 3?
Three states do not have an income tax.
Right.
Wyoming, Nevada, and Washington State.
Okay, that's pretty hard to compete with that. So I know that there was one effort on tobacco tax, and that one went down in flames. That's not meant to be a pun, but is that correct? That one didn't pass.
So we had a print hearing in Rev and Tax, and that did not get introduced. So that issue's been addressed this session. It does come back every so often, though.
All of the, what do they call them, sin tax bills,
Sin taxes,
right?
yes.
What about spending limitations?
There's another bill that was heard and passed through the Rev and Tax Committee in the House and is now going to be considered by the whole House. And it has provisions regarding spending limitations that already build off some that were on the books, but have kind of, the way we do our appropriations, they haven't really played a significant role because of the way monies can be shifted around into reserve pots and one-time monies versus ongoing, and how that all works through the appropriation process. So this bill proposes to readdress the limitations, and it also gives guidance to surpluses that can go into tax relief as opposed to potentially artificially inflating budgets. That's one of the challenges that we have, because without those kinds of checks and balances, when you have a boom like the real estate boom several years ago, if your budgets are allowed, they can go with that money until that bubble bursts, and then you start to have these cuts. Well, somebody will paint those cuts as rather dramatic, and somebody will say, well, we shouldn't have been there in the first place because you had this rapid growth that couldn't be sustained, and you built a budget around it. So these are some good measures for checks and balance to keep things on more of a smooth glide path. And quite frankly, if your revenues go up, there is another argument to be made that maybe your tax policy needs to be adjusted down.
Right. You know, I'd like to talk to both of you for just a minute. I've had a couple programs on this land board issue. It's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that I do know that the land board has been given the responsibility through the endowment fund to funds like the university and 2 hospitals, state hospitals, but here's where I'm saying, correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that the land board is now engaged in buying private property, private businesses, if you will, and competing with free enterprise, and yet they don't have the same taxes that their competition has.
Well, Elizabeth, it might sound like a good idea in theory, but I think in the actual practice, someone who's working for the government does not have the mind of an entrepreneur.
Right.
And they're not going to put in that, burn that midnight oil, work the double shift, solve a problem. And I think we've seen it with the, with that real estate project, the water center with the University of Idaho, where that thing got way over budget. And I just think there isn't the business mentality within the bureaucracy to run a business profitably, and I think it'd be a big mistake. Might look good on paper, but I think it's going to play itself out in a very negative way if we go down that road.
Well, one of the questions that I had is, it's my understanding that the Land Board has already purchased some kind of a storage unit business, and here's the question that I had. It's owned and operated by the state of Idaho. And the other representative that I asked this question said it was a good question, but they couldn't answer it. And that is, if it's owned and operated by the state of Idaho and they're hiring somebody to operate it, is that person now a public employee? And if so, are they open to all of the things that a public employee, the benefits of a public employee? Do you know?
No, a lot of these businesses that come over into competition with the private sector, the state will have an investment, but they'll also lease them to a business. So it doesn't necessarily imply public employees,
okay,
like with a storage unit. However, it still is a problem, a principal problem in my mind, because it is competition with the private sector. They do not have the risk factors that you inherently have in the private sector, as Representative Hart was referencing regarding entrepreneurs and how they're driven. There's not, the risk factor's not there. The management of the endowment lands and using that money to help with our budgets and minimize tax burden by helping pay for things like public education, that's more about timber, mining, possibly siting of renewable energies, maybe geothermal exploration and such. That's where I see the checks and balances. And the legislature sets the laws, and the separation of powers, though it gets a little convoluted because the Land Board's made up of constitutional officers, but it's not executive versus legislative. The Constitution provides for Land Board function through law. And so there is a bill being considered right now. It's run into some difficulties in the Senate. It passed overwhelmingly in the House. I think there were 3 no votes on the floor, to try to put those parameters in perspective, as opposed to a purely revenue generating theme that sets aside some of these other parameters and gets us into the really compromised areas, which I don't subscribe to, and that is when they start investing and getting into competition with the private sector.
Especially when it's not a level playing field, because the private sector has the taxes, the property taxes that they have to pay, and yet that's not the case with Land Board.
That's exactly right.
All right, we're already out of time. I can't believe it. How if people want to get hold of either one of you, can you give your website or a way that they can get hold of you?
Well, I have a website. It's hartforlegislature.com.
Okay.
And of course, I can be reached through the website for the legislative branch of government.
And this program will also be on fyidaho.com. It will be on our YouTube, as well as KPGN and Channel 11. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.